I think it's market value. If the NBA is still needing to help and subsidize the WNBA, so be it. Stephen A.
You hear that? This is not now. This is coming from a woman and a black woman, so y'all can't even say, because I know how y'all get. I know how.
The WNBA is on fire right now, and we're not talking about the good kind. While Caitlin Clark just delivered the most electrifying rookie season in league history, the people running the show are about to burn it all down. Sage Steele, the former ESPN powerhouse who never holds back, just dropped a truth bomb so explosive that half the league is pretending they didn't hear it. She looked straight into the camera and said what everyone's been thinking, but nobody dared to say out loud. Market value trumps your feelings. And right now, the WNBA players don't have the leverage they think they do. And here's the kicker. The clock is ticking.
Would not have gotten his $100 million contract if the network wasn't making money, if he wasn't helping bring in that money. We have to pay attention to market value, not our feelings, but what dollar amount is coming in. And that's how those salaries are based.
Hey, Sage Steele. Sage Steele, you was talking that talk, mama. They not.
Negotiations have collapsed. An entire 2025 season hangs by a thread. Buckle up, because this story is about to get uncomfortable. Sage Steele didn't mince words when she addressed the ongoing contract negotiations between WNBA players and league ownership. This is a woman who spent years navigating the corporate battlefield at ESPN, and she knows exactly how these conversations go down behind closed doors. She pointed directly at Stephen A. Smith's $100 million contract and said, "Look, this isn't charity. Stephen A. gets paid that astronomical figure because he generates revenue. The network isn't handing out 9-figure deals based on vibe."
About the WNBA collective bargaining agreement. So, Trista, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I just saw The Athletic reported, David, that the WNBA PA is countering, and they asked for 33% of a revenue split. Now I think it's down to about 30%. I asked Nafisa Collier at this unrivaled event in the middle of the WNBA All-Star weekend what percentage they wanted, and we now finally found out what that was. It seems like this is getting contentious, but I guess to you, what's the
or moral principles? They're writing checks because his voice brings eyeballs, and eyeballs bring advertising dollars. It's cold, it's calculated, and it's business. Sage then turned that same lens on the WNBA and delivered her dose of reality. Your salaries are determined by the money you bring in, not by what you believe you deserve. And that right there is the message the league office will never say publicly because they're terrified of the backlash. Now, let's talk about what actually happened at the negotiating table, because this is where things get messy. January 9th was supposed to be the deadline. The players had their demands ready. The union had rallied support, and everyone expected some kind of movement. Instead,
go to the actual table. You don't need the commissioner of the NBA to be at this table at any time. But what they've done is they've extended the deadline first by 30 days, 40 days. So it's been a total of 70 days, which all you're doing is delaying a work stoppage. You want to get to that work stoppage because that's a legal term of art. You want to get to some sort of lockout or strike so then it can go to the next stage of these negotiations. But the biggest misunderstanding here is that
WNBA owners did something absolutely brutal. They ghosted them. Complete radio silence. Left the players on read like a bad Tinder date. No counteroffer, no explanation, just crickets. So what did the players do? They took it to the streets. Literally. They organized a protest outside the NBA store in New York, rolled up with an inflatable rat like they were picketing a construction site, and released emotional statements accusing ownership of deliberately running out the clock. The optics were powerful. The social media reactions were intense.
Revenue number the way they have it in the NBA. And Adam Silver is saying no because the NBA owners are saying no, because that's not taking into account all of the money that the WNBA owners need to profit and take off the table to pay down debt that has been accruing over the decades of losses. So that is why they're not having a meeting of the minds on any.
Yo, the fact that he even he just literally said decades of losses. That's crazy. That just slides by people in the W.
Here's where Sage Steele's perspective cuts through all the theater. She asked the one question that nobody in the players' camp wants to answer. If the NBA is still subsidizing your league after 28 years, how exactly are you in a position to make demands? That's not an insult, that's economics. And it's the kind of uncomfortable truth that doesn't play well in #activism. The players aren't asking for pocket change here. According to reporting from The Athletic, the union initially demanded 33% of all league revenues. Think about that number for a second. 1/3 of everything the WNBA brings in. They've since adjusted that demand down to around 30%. But even that figure is staggering when you look at
the revenues minus the benefits paid out like housing and transportation and all that. So what they're trying to say is, hey, we'll get rid of housing, but we'll have the max salary be higher. And I was just interested, in your experience, how many times do leagues do that? Where it's like, I'm going to try and cater to the elites because that's the big headline, and this is going to screw over the constituency.
No, it's funny. The union tends to do that more than we do, but we just keep a piece of paper and we put a value to everything. So we know the exact price per team to establish housing for the players. We know the exact price per percent.
Context. NBA players receive 50% of basketball-related income. So on the surface, 30% sounds almost reasonable, right? Here's the problem. The NBA model works because the league is wildly profitable. We're talking $10 billion in annual revenue. The WNBA has been operating in the red for decades. Not a few years. Decades. David Sampson, the former Marlins president who understands sports finance better than almost anyone, broke this down in brutal clarity. He explained that Adam Silver and the NBA owners are flat out refusing to peg salaries to a revenue percentage because they need to pay down decades of accumulated debt first.
We know what it means for every team's payroll if the minimum is $250,000 instead of $150,000. So we're just trading off a column during CBA negotiations, where if we give this, we want that back. And what the owners always say is that they want to come out ahead on their columns. They want to get more than they give. So that's why there's no specific landing point to any issue during a negotiation, because all the issues are intertwined and you tend to settle everything at the end. And that's when an agreement comes. But until that point, you've actually agreed to nothing. Well, the truth is you agree to a bunch of stupid stuff that you get out of the way when negotiations.
Let that sink in. Decades of losses. This isn't a league that's breaking even and trying to grow. This is a business that has been hemorrhaging cash since the Clinton administration, and it's still standing only because the NBA keeps writing checks. So the league came back with a counteroffer, and honestly, it's pretty significant. They proposed raising minimum salaries to potentially $1 million. Read that again. $1 million for the minimum salary. Right now, rookies and bench players are making $75,000, which is decent money for most Americans. But
because they move in lockstep. So you're really trying to get a landing spot for tons of issues, not just housing or minimums or tagging a percentage of revenue.
All right, man. Look, listen, man, this thing could be over soon, y'all. They're trying to kill Caitlin Clark in the league off. They're trying to kill the league off, man. Get down in the comments and let me know.
Compared to what their NBA counterparts earn. Ownership also put higher maximum salaries on the table for superstars like Aya Wilson and Breanna Stewart, potentially pushing into the $500,000 range or higher. On paper, that sounds like a massive win for the players. But there's a catch, and it's a big one. To make those numbers work, the league wants to strip away benefits packages. We're talking housing stipends, premium travel accommodations, all those perks that were fought for and negotiated into the previous collective bargaining agreement. The union sees this for exactly what it is, robbing Peter to pay Paul. Create flashy headline numbers that make it look like everyone's getting rich, while quietly getting the safety net that helps the majority of players who aren't household names. Sage Steele's comments become especially relevant when you zoom out and look at the actual revenue numbers, because this is where the gap between perception and reality gets enormous. The NBA generates $10 billion every single year. The WNBA's entire revenue for 2024 was estimated at around $200 million. And here's the part that should terrify everyone involved in these negotiations. That 200 million figure is artificially inflated by what we're calling the Caitlin Clark effect. Her rookie season drove record-breaking ratings and attendance numbers. Without Clark, those revenue figures would be significantly lower. So when players stand up and demand NBA-style revenue sharing, they're conveniently ignoring the fact that their league doesn't generate NBA-level revenue. You can't split a pie that doesn't exist. David Sampson explained how ownership approaches these negotiations, and it's fascinating in a cold-blooded kind of way. The teams keep detailed spreadsheets during collective bargaining talks. Every single benefit has a price tag attached. Housing for all 12 teams costs X amount per season. Retirement contributions cost Y amount per team. When the players ask for something, ownership doesn't just say yes or no. They calculate the exact financial impact, then demand something back in return. The goal from ownership's perspective is always to come out ahead on the ledger. Give less than you take. And before anyone screams that this is just greed, consider the alternative. This is a league that's been bleeding money for 28 years straight. At some point, financial survival stops being greed and starts being basic business sense. The players call it exploitation. The owners call it staying afloat. And honestly, both sides have a point. The negotiation timeline tells its own story of dysfunction. The original January 9th deadline came and went, so they extended it by 30 days. Then they extended it again by another 40 days. That's a total of 70 days past the point where everyone agreed they needed to have a deal done. And according to Sampson, these extensions aren't happening because both sides are making progress. They're delaying the inevitable work stoppage. Because once you hit a formal lockout or strike, the entire negotiation shifts into a different gear. You're talking federal mediators, potential court involvement, lawyers billing by the hour, and a process that could drag on for months. Nobody actually wants that. But the players have backed themselves into a corner by making this fight so incredibly public. They rallied the fan base, launched social media campaigns, staged protests with inflatable rats. How do you walk that back without looking like you lost? That's the trap they've built for themselves. Here's where Sage Steele's reality check becomes absolutely crucial. She's saying out loud what a lot of people think, but won't say because they don't want the Twitter mob coming after them. If your league requires continuous financial support from the NBA just to keep the lights on, you don't have the leverage you think you have. The NBA could theoretically pull that support tomorrow. They won't, because it would be a public relations nightmare and because they're genuinely invested in growing women's basketball. But the fact that they could do it is the entire point. The power dynamic is not what the players are pretending it is. Let's talk about what happens if this negotiation actually falls apart. Free agency is frozen right now. The moratorium that normally lasts a few days has stretched into months. Players can't sign with new teams. The rookies from the 2025 draft class are stuck in limbo. If the season doesn't start on time in May, the league loses its most valuable asset, momentum. The 2024 season was the most successful in WNBA history by almost every metric. Average attendance jumped 28%. National television ratings peaked at 3.2 million viewers for playoff games featuring Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. Merchandise sales doubled. Corporate sponsorships increased across the board. All of that evaporates if there's no 2025 season. And here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to acknowledge. The WNBA's newfound popularity is fragile as glass. It's built almost entirely on the shoulders of one player. Caitlin Clark drove 90% of the league's ratings increase in 2024. Games she played in averaged 1.44 million viewers. Games without her averaged under 500,000. The league's entire growth story is dependent on her continuing to play and continuing to draw in casual fans who wouldn't otherwise watch women's basketball. If those casual fans tune in for the 2025 season expecting to see the stars they fell in love with and instead find replacement players because of a lockout, they're not coming back. The players seem to believe they have leverage because the league is finally growing, but that growth is newer and more fragile than they want to admit. The WNBA has had false dawns before. The inaugural season in 1997 drew strong ratings. Then viewership declined for 15 straight years. The 2004 season with Diana Taurasi and Sue Bird generated buzz, then it faded. The 2016 Olympic bump brought renewed attention, and then ratings fell again. The pattern is crystal clear. Casual interest evaporates fast if the product becomes unavailable or if the storylines turn negative. That's why Sage Steele's comments about market value hit so hard. She's not saying women don't deserve equal pay in some abstract moral sense. She's saying that in professional sports, compensation is directly tied to revenue generation. And the WNBA's revenue, even with Caitlin Clark, is still a tiny fraction of what the NBA generates. The numbers don't lie. The average NBA team is worth $4 billion. The average WNBA team is worth $50 million. That's not because of sexism or discrimination. It's market economics. Fewer people watch, fewer people attend games, fewer people buy merchandise. The players' negotiating strategy seems designed to win public opinion rather than actually get a deal done. The inflatable rap protests, the emotional statements about ownership's bad faith, the social media campaigns, all of that plays well with the existing fan base. But it doesn't change the fundamental math. The league cannot pay out more than it brings in without continued NBA subsidies. And if the players push too hard, they risk killing the very momentum that finally has the league trending upward. Think about what the owners are actually offering here. Minimum salaries potentially reaching $1 million. That's more money than most WNBA players have made in their entire careers combined. Maximum salaries approaching $500,000 or more for the superstars. Yes, it comes with trade-offs on benefits, but it's still a massive increase from the current structure where the average salary hovers around $120,000. The players are rejecting that because they want a percentage of revenues instead of fixed salary amounts. But as David Sampson explained, ownership cannot agree to revenue sharing when they're still paying down decades of accumulated debt. Here's the question nobody's asking. What happens to the WNBA if this negotiation completely fails and the 2025 season gets canceled? Does the league even survive that? The NBA has invested hundreds of millions of dollars over 28 years. At some point, even the most patient investor starts asking whether it's worth continuing to fund a venture that can't achieve profitability. The players seem to assume the NBA will always be there to bail them out. But business decisions aren't made based on sentiment. They're made based on return on investment. Sage Steele's reality check might sound harsh, but it's the conversation this league desperately needs to have, not the performative public relations battle, not the social media virtue, signaling. An honest assessment of what the WNBA is actually worth right now, what it could be worth in 5 years, and how to structure a deal that keeps the league growing without bankrupting the teams. The players have every right to negotiate hard, but negotiation requires both sides to acknowledge reality. And the reality is that market value, not moral arguments, determines compensation in professional sports. The next deadline is approaching fast. If no deal gets reached, we're looking at either a lockout or a strike. Either way, the 2025 season is in serious jeopardy. And if that season doesn't happen, all the momentum from Caitlin Clark's historic rookie year evaporates overnight. The casual fans move on to something else. The corporate sponsors reassess their investments. The media coverage dries up, and the WNBA goes back to being a niche product that most Americans ignore. Is that what the players want? Because that's exactly what they're risking. Sage Steele laid it out with perfect clarity. This is about market value, not feelings. And right now, the market is saying the WNBA isn't worth what the players think it is. Whether that's fair or unfair doesn't matter. It's reality, and reality doesn't negotiate.